Hello, everyone. This is episode 6 of Gaming's Lost Memories. I am your host, BigReed, and today we will be talking about the used video game market, emulators, and ROMs. Now, this is kind of interesting because this is going to be a discussion not because I'm like a ROM or an emulator person. I don't think I've ever actually completed a game on an emulator. Like I've always like flirted with the idea of like seen some things with it, but long story short, the main focus is actually going to be because of the difficulties that you experience if developers and publishers don't provide a convenient way to play their games. So hear me out here, and I'll kind of explain what spawned this this podcast. Because originally, I was going to talk about Persona 3, yeah, probably Persona 3, 4, and 5 together, just because that's kind of like the new age where it's coming from SMT and Persona 3 being a dark game to it lightening up a little bit, still having, mature elements and everything like that, and then kind of becoming what Persona 5, which is its own thing. It's no longer under the SMT banner. But that was originally going to be the topic for today. And here's where the curveball came in. So I'm like, you know what I'll do? I'll do a quick little refresher because I have Persona 3 Portable, which I love the portable version. I shout out to DJ Dr. Josh. We always tease each other about this, but he definitely teases me about not being able to run in Persona 3 Portable. And I'm like, you can run in Persona 3. I'm like, play FES or play the original. Ah. So he always gives me a hard time about that. He's like, this game's terrible. He's like, I can't run in it. And the reason why you can't run in it is because the PlayStation, portable hardware was very limited. But long story short, I bust out my PSP. I'm looking at it, sitting over here. I have the red and black God of War like special edition they did. So I've had several PSPs over the year. I bought the original PSP 1000, the one that basically had the messed up screen where like every single screen that I've seen of those had so many like burnt out pixels or stuck pixels. Like it was shockingly common. In the first few months of its release, I don't ever remember seeing anyone that I saw always had like multiple like stuck pixels or burnt out pixels. So that was always kind of interesting. But then I had a PSP 2000, and then this most recent one I have, which is in really good shape, is a PSP 3000, the black and red like Kratos edition. Looks absolutely awesome. Played some Persona 3 Portable on it. The disc was still in there, the UMD disc. And I'm like, awesome. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to find my charger before I go about my day and, go to physical therapy. And I plug it in and it's like blinking, but normally the light will stay on, right? On that console. I believe so. Anyway, but normally you'll get like a light that's on letting you know that it's charging. But it was blinking. I was like, that's kind of weird. So I go about my day. I come back. I go to turn the console on. It's very clear that the battery died at some point because it's having me like reselect the date and time and all that good stuff. Another common thing if you go back in the retro, and fire one of the old game consoles up. So I'm like, okay, well let me check the battery, and I go to pop the battery out, and I have, looking at it now, the 2200 milliamp PSP battery pack, the official Sony one, like the expanded battery. And soon as I like click that hinge, and the back that connects to it is like the expanded back, so you can fit the larger battery in it. It just explodes off, and I'm like, what? And luckily, the battery wasn't leaking or anything like that, but it is shockingly swollen. So, just basically over the years of, just being in storage, being in the basement, packed up in moving boxes, and all of that stuff, it just isn't working and is dead. So I ordered a new battery. But my whole point, and kind of why I wanted to talk about like the used game industry and whatnot in general, and we'll kind of get into it a little bit here. But the reason why this kind of kicked off the discussion is I just wanted to play Persona 3 Portable, right? And Persona 3 and 4 Persona 3 Portable, Persona 4 Golden, I think are re-releasing on like basically all consoles. The Xbox versions might be like the only enhanced versions, which is kind of weird, but regardless, they're not coming out till January. So we got a few more months for those. Persona 5, either came out today, I think, depending on when this podcast releases. It came out on the other consoles and everything like that. I believe today. So long story short, this whole idea started because I just wanted to fire it up and maybe play it for like an hour or so just to refresh my memory on it a little bit before I like shared some of my stories about that franchise. And I can't. So my other option is to hook up my PS2, which as of right now, with the new TV that I bought and the monitor that I use, I don't know if I can hook up the old style cables, like the audio video cables. I have component cables for the GameCube, for the PS2. Like it's one of those ones where it was all of them, and hopefully they're still in good shape. But I guess my point is like, as gamers, there's several ways you can kind of experience old games. Now, having experienced everything, so I've always done everything legally. I'm completely fine with rebuying games. That does not bother me. But I'll use Nintendo's, Nintendo Online service, so you can play Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64 games. But that was pretty recent. Like in the past couple of years or so, you were even able to play those. So, your options are going online and, buying a game that's no longer in publication anymore, or downloading it from the publisher if they even offer it, which so many games don't even offer it, or there's, you might game on PC or you might game on PlayStation or Nintendo or Xbox, and it's exclusive to another platform. I'll give you a great example. I've been really wanting to play the Final Fantasy remakes. It was like 1 through 6 or something like that. Whatever collection it is, but they're like the enhanced versions that are on PC, and they're only on PC. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I would prefer to play them on my Switch. So it puts me in an odd position where it's like I want to experience this, but like I'm kind of being forced to experience it in a way, or not experience it at all. Like what if they didn't re-release these games? So like as of right now, I don't think I have a way of playing, Persona 3 Portable, or I have Persona 3 FES as well on the PS2, but I would have to hook up my PS2, which, to be honest, I haven't hooked up a lot of my retro game consoles because I don't even know if the stuff that I have now can even like support them. So it really puts the community into an odd position, like entertainment, and especially with video games. There's some growing pains on ownership and everything like that, because at the end of the day, with something like say Xbox Game Pass or Nintendo Switch Online, you have to have a subscription based service to play play these old games. Now keep in mind, Nintendo in general, they, on the Wii U and 3DS and Wii as well, actually had a really awesome virtual console. And I think the reason why you're not seeing, them bring the virtual console back is they are slowly going to, very slowly for some reason. Like the Switch, I think has been out for 5 years, and you can't even like put themes on it. Console I love, but like even their Nintendo Switch Online, they're finally just getting around to releasing 64 games, and they still have like a lot to release. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like interesting. So my point is, they're pushing it towards a subscription-based service, kind of like Netflix, Hulu, etc. And I think that makes sense because at the end of the day, they're raking in billions of dollars in yearly memberships, for these services. So from a financial standpoint, I kind of understand, where they're coming from. But the flip side is these publishers no longer benefit from the used game market. So if you aren't giving a good or efficient way, or even offering an option to make money off of the game, because at the end of the day, that's what I want to be able to turn my Switch on, or whatever the most recent consoles, whatever I'm experiencing, and be able to play these games easily. But you also have to keep in mind that if you're not given that option, you can't do it. That's like one of the craziest things. So the other option is playing it on the original hardware, which at the end of the day, let's just talk about that real quick. I think that is the absolute best way to experience a game. So what I mean is playing on the original hardware, original controller, and on a CRT TV if you're able to. And funny enough, oh my gosh, long story short, when I was in high school, and the TV's probably, old as heck now because I had this is going back, so this is going to be even funnier. You guys ready for this? TVs used to have the cable hookup, so the little like auxiliary line, right? And they didn't have the audio video, line. So old living room TV, good God, this thing had to have been from the 80s. And the way that I would have to hook up consoles was we had a VCR. And I remember the VCR, I think, plugged into the cable line on the TV or something like that. This is all very vague, but it had audio video cables. So technically, you could turn the VCR on and it would receive the input of the console AV cables going into the VCR and would display it on the television. Or, I don't know if anyone remembers these. They used to have these like cable hookups where you would have to hook up your, NES or whatever through the cable line and then put it on channel 3 or 4. Like it had to be on channel 3 or 4 and it would basically play through the cable line. Oh my God. That was absolutely crazy. And then, you get your audio video cables and things get a lot more sturdy and just better displays, better audio. Like everything was like so much better. But my gosh, like, so first of all, this TV, eventually I had this like horrible TV and it was one of those, I don't even know how long I had it. It was like so old and there's no way it was new when I got it. Just knowing the circumstances growing up, it might have been found and then given to me. But, near the end of its life, it would do that green line across, like in the center, just a green line. And then you'd, just smack it and eventually it would start working again. So I did that for years. And then out of the blue, the TV was finally replaced because it was just dead. And you know how like when you're younger and you don't really have too much money for yourself because you're just either a teenager or you're like 12 basically. You have a paper out, but geez, oh man, that was like slave labor. I made like $20 a month. Yeah, it's really hard to have a video game hobby. You gotta wait and cross your fingers for birthdays and Christmas, hopefully. But yeah, so I ended up getting my mom purchased me a television. It might have been a JVC, and I remember the speakers. It was a flat screen, so it was huge. It was still huge, but the screen was flat. Had speakers on the sides, and it had really interesting audio. So if characters went from like, say you were watching a show and they went from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen, the audio would follow. It was like this like dynamic audio, which didn't sound like that crazy of a thing, but it was really cool. And it had the component hookups. So I don't have that TV anymore. It's no longer my possession to a lot of crazy, situations and circumstances. But holy smokes, that thing is like so valuable now, like looking at the used game market. So basically, you want to play, an old game and you're getting old hardware, which can be expensive now. You're finding the game itself, which holy smokes, you better pray that game's not rare now because you might be spending $150 plus, depending on what it is, to even play the game. Then you need your memory card. So if you don't have all your old stuff, or if you do, in my case, and your PSP battery just explodes out of the back of the console, it's pretty difficult. But that is the best way to experience these older games. Like I really do think it's better on the original hardware. I think it's better on a CRT TV, which if you can find one, good luck. Probably mid 2000s, maybe to the end. You could probably still go into Walmart and find some of these TVs, but now you're going on eBay and praying to God you can find it without crazy shipping costs because they weigh 9 million pounds. So experiencing these games is pretty difficult. Now, here's the flip side too. Say a publisher or developer does have either a virtual console or some type of Nintendo Switch Online service or Xbox Game Pass. For older games, it gets tricky because the games are being emulated. So obviously, you're not playing them on the original hardware. So what has to happen is, they have to be configured kind of to the new hardware. And, in certain cases, say like for the Nintendo 64 games, you have, an emulator which emulates and pretends to be the new hardware, pretends to be the old hardware, and then you have to have the actual games themselves, right? The ROMs or whatever. So that's done through these, services, which is great, but sometimes they don't always run well. So I'll give you an example because I was pretty excited to replay Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, Nintendo Switch Online portion. And playing on the new controller is tough. So that's one thing, like getting used to that, because one thing that I feel like Nintendo, especially like with their development, one thing that they do better than I think anybody is they maximize the hardware that they're developing on. And if you give the well, they're the creators of it, but if you give them a new controller, like the developers, the Nintendo 64 controller, even though it has some opportunities and it's a little awkward, it plays those games perfectly. Like you fire up Ocarina of Time and it just like makes sense. Where you play it on like the newer controllers, and the first thing I tried to do was like move the camera, and I'm like, oh yeah, but I don't have that Z button, in that little gun position, like the trigger position, where it just like felt natural moving the camera around. But at launch, there was a lot of complaints that there was input lag, and it didn't feel right to me. I don't know how much input lag there was, but it definitely felt delayed and awkward. And input lag is one of the common things that can happen when you're emulating games, or when a developer basically re-releases some of their games and everything like that. So it's a tricky situation, because at the end of the day, the used game market doesn't really benefit the publishers or developers in any single way. So I always look at this like, personally, I don't emulate, I don't use ROMs. It's not that I'm against it. It's just I would prefer to just buy it and play it on my current hardware, like completely formally. Like I like that. I want the good experience. I don't want to have to change 900 settings and ROMs or emulators to like fix this. That stuff isn't fun to me. I appreciate the the like the user experience that you kind of get when it's official. So like I don't mind waiting. But saying that, publishers and developers put their communities in awkward positions, because if you don't give a way to purchase it again or to play it officially, like you're almost encouraging piracy or whatever you would call it. Now, here's where it gets tricky too. So when you say piracy, you think of like, oh my God, this is absolutely terrible. And at the end of the day, if I can, I would rather buy a movie, use a streaming service, or buy games on the virtual console, right? That's my stance. That's how I've always been. I would always rather own a copy of the game and play it on the hardware. But now you're kind of seeing certain things happen. So the first is, if the publisher's not giving you the option, there's literally no benefit to them in any way, shape, or form. Like if they're not giving you the option to purchase it from them, then like what are you supposed to do? You know what I mean? So you get put into an awkward position, because the used game market, was kind of this weird middle ground that for the longest time GameStop, that was their business model. And it worked, and you can talk about like what's going on with their company kind of recently. It's interesting in more ways than one now. But the used game market was, publishers were always complaining like, oh, GameStop's taking our money here, because people are just waiting and buying the game at a cheaper cost, which that's fine. But okay, so you go back to the NES, the Super Nintendo. So I stopped at a game store, which I'll talk about in a second here. I was looking for like GameCube and PS2 games. There's no benefit to you if you don't offer me a way to purchase it. The used game market, like you go and buy a GameCube game, that doesn't go to the publisher, that doesn't go to the developer at all. So it puts you kind of like in this awkward ownership position where, going forward, you're going to see digital as an option more and more, and probably digital is the preferred option, to be honest, because like it's just so much easier and more convenient. But once again, if the publisher and developers don't offer this as a solution, then what do you do? You know what I mean? So that's kind of where people want to pirate, because there's literally no other options to play the games. It's either, go on eBay or, to a used game store or something like that, and spend hundreds of dollars to get the hardware and software just to play this old game, or you can just download it on your phone or computer, like however they do it. So it's a really intriguing position, because I'm in the camp of, So I come from a business background, and the way that I look at it is you shouldn't have your consumers jumping through hoops, because the more hoops that you give them, or the more hurdles that they have to overcome to, experience your product, the less likely they are to give it a shot or even try it. So that was really weird with Nintendo's Virtual Console service, which basically the Wii U had one, which is exclusive to the Wii U. The Wii had one, which is exclusive to the Wii. The 3DS had one, like et cetera, et cetera. And to be honest, like the Wii U Virtual Console and the Wii Virtual Console were absolutely phenomenal. But it seems like that's going away. Plus, they were exclusive to the platforms. So another shout out to DJ Dr. Josh, but he's like, yeah, I own like 7 digital copies of Zelda, which is crazy that you have to like rebuy it. So it's like, I don't know. It just puts you in a really odd position, because right now, used game market prices are high. It's kind of difficult to, even play them, because you have to have like a compatible TV if you really want to experience it. Because I'll be honest, when HD scale it or put it on something that can run component cables like on an HD TV, it just like it doesn't look correct. They were designed with the CRT TV styles. You know what I mean? So like if you look at a picture, somebody has a picture floating around of Aerith or Aerith from Final Fantasy VII, and it's like I knew these graphics were bomb back in the day, and it's like a picture of, the HD upscaled, little portrait of her on a HD TV or monitor, and then like this version on the CRT TV, and the CRT version just looks a million times better. And it's like I knew I remembered the graphics were a different way, and that definitely is true. Like that's the best way to play them. They just look a million times better that way. Funny enough, I actually played. I know we started off the podcast with Persona 3, but I actually played Persona 3 on my buddy's monitor when we were in the military. Well, it might have just been a really small HD TV, actually. I think it was like a 20 inch or 22-inch TV, but I remember like you could kind of like keep it in the 4:3 aspect ratio, or like stretch it, or like, and I remember like stretching it. I was like, this looks weird. So it's like so complicated. But at the end of the day, it just kind of reminded me, like I wish there was like you you're hit or miss with used video game stores. So I'll share some just some stories about these. So the first one is the battery, the PSP battery. Um, the where I grew up, really small town, and there's this one shop space. So there's not shops. It was kind of a running joke that if you open a business in my hometown, in a year it's going to be gone, and there's going to be another business in there, then another year it'll be gone, and it just cycles through. There was a pizza shop place that has had 9 different pizza shops in it, which is hilarious, because I think they just have the ovens in there, so they're like every time they sell it, they're just like, okay, you give it a shot, see if you can keep this business open. But there was a shop, and it feels like everybody gives that shop a chance to stick something they feel like I can make it work in there. But many years ago, like when the Pokemon trading card game was out, it used to be a card shop, and I distinctly remember going in there, and this will lead into the PSP battery, trust me. But I remember going in there. She's 20, more than 20 years ago at this point, and back in the day, you used to be able to weigh Pokemon packs. And there's a reason why they ship them in the cardboard now, so you can't weigh them to tell if there's like holographics and stuff in there. But they used to weigh them to tell if there can be a holographic in there. So if you go on eBay now and they say like this is the weight, you're probably going to get a holo in there. It's pretty accurate these days, because like the scales, like it's just so minute, but you're getting a heavier card. But long story short, they were either base set or fossil set, and I don't think they were Japanese, but I can't remember. But long story short, he had like a fishbowl of like packs, and it's like guaranteed holographic. So I asked him, I'm like, well, what does that mean? And he's like, well, if you buy one of these packs, they were like $9 or something like that. He's like, you get a guaranteed holographic. And I was like, okay. So I did it. And I remember like my buddy was talking to him about other cards or something. And I remember opening it, and I'm going through, and yeah, there was a rare in there, but I'm like, there was not a holographic card in here. And he's just like, oh well, I'm like, what? No, like he's very lucky that I was like 14, or I would have like complained and like, give me my money back or give me another pack. But I was just like, what just happened? He's just like mumbled and stuttered and was like, yeah, I guess not. I was like, well, okay, this is weird. But later on, there was a used game shop there, and oh my god, looking back, I would have went and with all my money and just like bought every single thing they had, because they had a lot of really good games. And nowadays you go into game stores and it's so hit or miss. Like I went to one the other day and they just didn't really have anything, you know what I mean, of value or of interest. But back then, man, they had everything. And I remember one of my buddies from the military was staying with me. It might have been for Skyrim weekend, which we'll talk about on another podcast. But we were hanging out, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna hook up my PS2 and play yada yada. I don't even know what I was playing, and I was like, I need a new controller. And I just remember I was like, you can hang out here. It's like, I'll be back. And I just went there and bought like a brand new. It's the PS2 controller I use to this day. It's like silver. It's super clean, like just brand spanking new. Basically, it's like I took it out of the package still. But it was really cool just being able to go there and be like, yeah, I need this. But that's where I got that PSP battery too. And I remember going there and I was like, because I was playing, I think it was Persona 3 Portable. This is maybe 2010ish, and I was like, man, this game is absolutely incredible. I'm playing it, like I need more battery. So I went there and they had the expanded battery, like the official Sony one. Like it was just such an awesome place. But you just don't see these shops anymore because it's getting more and more difficult. So I went to, I want to say the name of the place was the Hall of Hobbies. And it was kind of interesting because like I just Googled, hey, game stores, video game stores near me, and obviously like it pulls up Game Stops, but you can't really find old stuff there anymore. But the pictures like looked absolutely awesome, super bright, super organized, and everything like that. I get in there, and I don't know if they were like shuffling stuff around, but it kind of looked a little disjointed. It would have been fun to explore it more because, like, for example, it was very difficult to walk through there, and especially like I wasn't the only like customer group in there. There was a family, mom, grandma, grandpa, and two kids maybe. They might have been brother and sister. But long story short, with that many people in there, it like you're shimmying around. Like it's hard to actually look at the products. Boxes and boxes of just random stuff. Like I'm looking in the one box and there's just it's a box of Skylanders. Here's a box of new Skylanders. Here's a box of NES controllers and the arcade pad on the NES. I was like, whoa. I don't know if I've seen one of those in person recently, but it was really cool. Then they have some stuff behind the glass, but nothing too rare. They had some DS Pokemon games, some Game Boy Advances. They actually had, I think, a Japanese copy of Final Fantasy V for the Super Nintendo, which was interesting. I kind of wanted to buy that, but I was like the condition of it didn't look bad, but I was like, I don't even know how to play this. But um, the point is like it's really hard to even find these, used games easily. It'd be wonderful to be able to go in and be like, oh, cool. Like you have a decent selection of GameCube games, but really everything kind of migrated online, which isn't bad because like you have just unlimited resources essentially. Like you go on eBay and you can find anything you're looking for. Price might be high depending on what you're looking for, but it would be nice if it's possible. But I was thinking more about it, and as I'm leaving that place, because their prices were reasonable, but they didn't have any rare stuff, so you can't have both. If you have rare stuff, you're gonna have to kind of look online and get an understanding of the value of something and price it at that or a little bit higher. So for example, if you have a used game that's about $100 online, you gotta price it between $100 to $120. And there's been used game stores where I can go in, and I'll never be disrespectful to somebody's business, but you can kind of haggle a little bit. You just got to know, like, you don't want to say something that's really valuable and be like, I'll give you $60 for it, and they're like, it's worth 150. Like, don't be a jerk. So you almost have to list it at those prices to even maintain that inventory, because at the end of the day, what you don't want is somebody coming in there spending $3,000 and you're like, yes, now you don't have any cool inventory, and they just listed everything online. So you're kind of hoping that people will come in and sell stuff and trade stuff. Like it's a really weird market, and I don't know if there's like really anything equivalent, because I don't know if DVDs really hold their value. So like you look online, like I was trying to sell some of my DVDs that are brand new and sealed, and like I couldn't even sell them for $1. So it's like kind of hard to get rid of them. I actually took them to it's called the Exchange, and they sell a lot of used games, and they actually have had an awesome selection, but they're priced like 40 to 50% higher than like what things are actually worth. But once again, it kind of keeps stuff there. So if you're actually looking for something, it's a tricky predicament. But here I am, and kind of what spawned this is, at the end of the day, I just wanted to fire up Persona 3 Portable, play it for a little bit, so I could jog my memory a little bit to talk about SMT and the Persona series. But it's just difficult to do these days. So if you want to play used games, you're spending a lot of money. If you want to do it on the original hardware, you're spending a lot of money. You're gonna have to set everything up. Gonna have to find an old TV if you want to do it the right way. Like it's just a really interesting time right now, because for some reason it seems like with your DVD entertainment or movies, music, like it all went digital so much more seamlessly. And video games feel different because this is so tricky. I don't know. It's tough to explain. I think because ownership of it, and like they're collector's items, where like a movie's not really, it doesn't feel like a collector's item, but a rare game does. And maybe it's because we as gamers kind of associate these experiences so closely with things that were happening in our lives. So the nostalgia factor, which I don't think nostalgia impacts how you view the game necessarily. So for me, I've never gone back and played a game that I thought was awesome that just is bad now. Like most of the games that I liked at the time were good at the time, and they're still good now, so they stood the test of time. But you have your nostalgia of the time. So to kind of look back at the used game market again, I fired up Panzer Dragoon, the remake, and just the nostalgia at the time. So my buddy Joe, he had a Sega Saturn, and I'm going to do another podcast on the Sega Saturn itself. But what was so interesting about that is like you build those memories of that console. So like I associate that console and my experiences with him and us just being young boys and being goofy and just running around being crazy, and then we'd go and play Virtual Cop 2. And it's really funny because like we have that game like completely memorized. Like both of us could fly through that, and we'd end, and like the scores were so dang close. We'd beat the game in one sitting every time, and just like go back outside and run around and play and ride bikes and stuff. But I feel like gamers kind of associate those experiences with fond memories, and maybe that's why they hold their value, as opposed to I have this like I had DVDs that I didn't even open, and I couldn't even sell them for 99 cents. You know what I mean? Like they just don't want them. Like there's even when I took them to the Exchange to sell them, I think they took like 30 or 40 of them, which was great. I was just happy to clean some of them out. But yeah, there was like nerdy stuff in there, anime collections, and they're just like, like we have like 10 copies. I guess we don't even need them. Like they made 100 million copies of this movie. So it's really interesting, because with the video game industry as of right now, you always are playing what's new, and that's one of my favorite things. So I love experiencing a ton of games. So I've played thousands of games at this point. I've written video game reviews. I wrote for 2 different websites, back in the day. One more recent than well, actually, they're both pretty recent. I think I officially stopped writing reviews and game articles. And I was on a different podcast, too, at the time for darkstation.com. But I stopped around 2015-ish. Just life got busy, and, I was working a whole bunch. But my point is with all of that, and what was my point with that? I do this sometimes. I get on a tangent. I'm like, where was I going with that? But, you associate these experiences with, fond memories and everything like that. And I don't know. Like when you're reviewing a game or when you're remembering your experience, you kind of remember the experiences at the time. And I think that's less so with other forms of media, which is really interesting because you you have something that is considered art. So I guess movies can be considered art too, but it's this weird art slash entertainment thing where at the end of the day they're meant to be played, but now there's so few copies in circulation that if you can't download it, now, like if you're not given an option from the publisher to download it and play it, you're yeah, you're doing a lot to try to even like experience this game. It's expensive. It's really, I don't know. It's really interesting. So my desire to play, Persona just kind of kicked all this off. And I'm like, I just wanted to talk about Persona a little bit because I have like cool memories from that too. Um, but yeah, so I was playing Panzer Dragoon, and that just reminds me of like the Sega Saturn and everything like that. And it's another thing. It's like, hey, they remade it, but if they didn't remake that game, you're buying a Sega Saturn or trying to download the emulator and ROM, quote unquote, as piracy. But even that's kind of weird too. So I don't know how much everybody understands, but it's really weird because like when you research it, emulators are legal because you can like make backups of your console's BIOS or something like that. So that's legal, and you can technically make like backups of your games to have them. That's legal, but you have to do it like with the game itself. But then, there's like ROM sites where people go to and just download them for, free basically. But once again, it's like I don't know, how can you hold somebody accountable if you don't give them the option to do so? So I guess the equivalent, like say, I use Apple Music, um, like I have an option. Like I could go on like if there was Apple Music, but it was all old video games, like $15 a month or $10 a month or whatever it is, like yeah, that would be fine with experiencing that. So there has to be like a convenient way to do it, and I think you're going to see more so. You'll see more so like the Xbox Game Pass, and I remember Xbox Game Pass coming out because I think this is kind of important to highlight because this is probably where the future of gaming is going slowly. So you talk about the used game market and everything, right? And if you're if you're looking for it, you're looking for a disc or a game in good condition, the manual, if it came with a map, like the case is good and not damaged and all of that. But most games today don't even like come with a manual anymore, and so many games, you know they gave you the disc, and on the disc they would put like fighting game characters on it that were locked behind a paywall, but they were they were on the disc. So there's just like so many like weird things that happen. But like as the digital option becomes more efficient for new games, that's good, right? Because you can just download it. Like it's super convenient. You can switch between like three games if you're just like messing around with some games. You want to play like a few games in a day or something. Like you can switch easily. You don't have to get up. You don't have to change cartridges around. But even so, like you're seeing less and less of collector's editions. The games don't come with manuals anymore. You're basically just getting like a case. You know what I mean? Some games are digital only. That's another interesting thing too. So like it's going towards that experience, and it's going slower. So Xbox Game Pass, I remember hearing about it because one of my employees that I used to work with, he was big into Xbox, so newer Xbox. So take a step back. I on a previous podcast I talked about Halo, and I didn't own the original Xbox, but experiencing it with friends who had Xboxes, like I had a good time. I loved it. I really loved that experience with my friends. But after that generation, so the GameCube was my main console, and I ended up, purchasing a PS2 later on and loved it. I love the PS2. It's one of my favorite consoles ever. Like just the quality of the library is insane. And you have the quality of the library, but then you have like, I like this really super specific genre. Awesome. Here's 50 games. And it just wasn't like that with the GameCube, which I still love, by the way. But the next generation, You have your Wii 360 and PS3, and the Xbox 360 was my main console for a really long time. It took probably, I want to say 5 or 6 years for Sony to turn the PS3 around. And really, the full turnaround kind of happened with the PS3 Slim. Like when they relaunched it, they started getting, games back and exclusives back. But, you know, the uh, the Xbox was just like, that was my main console. So then after that, you know, you have what, your PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and it wasn't the Switch, was it? The Wii U, I guess technically. I guess the Wii U. That was an interesting console. But long story short, I switched back to the PlayStation 4 because um, eventually near the end, the PlayStation 3, like Sony fully turned it around, and it was kind of like the main platform, I would say, for like developers again, which that took years and years and years. So you just had a better selection there. Then I switched to the PS4. So around that time, if I am playing anything, because I'm pretty busy at that time of my life, it's going to be on the PS4, right? So I remember him telling me about Xbox Game Pass when it came out, and he's like, "Yeah, you pay like a monthly service and you get access to all these games." But it's not necessarily just streaming. So I think where it really works out, because I have Xbox Game Pass now, because I actually found the new Xbox console. Funny enough, I've been looking for a PlayStation 5 because if I was going to buy one of the newer consoles outside of the Switch, it was going to be a PS5. But you just can't find them. It's been 2 years. You can't freaking find one. And good luck. The holiday season's coming up. So, if anyone's able to find one for Christmas, awesome. If not, don't beat yourselves up too much over it. But I got an email from Microsoft and they're like, hey, we're going to have Xbox One X's in stock, like the bundles in stock. So if you want one, I'm like, okay. So I ordered one and I got one. But Xbox Game Pass is amazing. So it's probably the best like deal in gaming right now. But Microsoft is banking on it. Like what they want is to put Xbox Game Pass on other platforms because they see that's where the money is. And shockingly enough, they're right. So as opposed to doing things with a virtual console, and I should have like looked up some more information, but I believe with Nintendo Switch Online, uh, okay, yeah, I just looked at it. I wanted to double check it to have the correct information. But Nintendo Switch Online, which I mean, it's not even a premier service yet. Like it has so much room for improvement. In 2021, made Nintendo $1 billion in revenue. Xbox Game Pass in 2021 made $2.9 billion in revenue. That's absolutely insane. That's a crazy revenue stream, and I wish I, you know, had the information, which I don't know if Nintendo's ever really released it, of like virtual console sales, because at the end of the day, between Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo just has like the best, I would say, like the virtual console library if they threw everything on there. And then, a lot of the other, like older companies that kind of, launched with the NES, so like your Capcoms and everything like that. I think they just have, like, there's so many, Square, there's so many games out there. But if you charge somebody for whatever reason, if you charge somebody $10 a month, $20 a month, whatever these subscription models cost, in media too, so streaming services and everything too, they're more likely to have one or multiple. And you can kind of justify $10 a month coming out of your account as opposed to, buying each individual movie for $10 that you want to watch. Same thing with games, I guess. So there's something there because I would be very curious the 1 billion in revenue in a year versus how much the virtual console averaged over, say, like, a few years, because the Wii U didn't have a really long console life either, but it had a banging virtual console. So it's really interesting. But I remember him telling me about Xbox Game Pass, to kind of go back to that real quick. And I was like, I don't know about this. He's like, it's basically like, Netflix for video games. I'm like, yeah, yeah. Now that I've experienced it, I'm like, I can see it going here. But I think what is critically important is, as of right now, games cannot be streamed very well like a movie. The input lag, anything I've ever experienced with streaming a game, the cloud versions, whatever, it's not worth it in my opinion as of right now. So with Xbox Game Pass, like, you can download the games, Now, that's awesome. So, like, literally, you could just pay for that every month. Like, you don't even need to buy games, which is crazy because, like, I don't, how do you, how do you maximize the revenue in that perspective with, say, like, okay, Call of Duty is coming out, so whatever, new Call of Duty, you don't need to put that on Game Pass. But if you put that on Game Pass, geez Louise, everybody's going to sign up for Game Pass. So, like, what makes more money? Putting these games exclusively behind a subscription model, or, your Grand Theft Auto comes out and sells 50 million copies at this point, or, you're selling 20 million copies. Like, what's better? Or maybe both. Like, you release it for, 6 months or 3 months and then you put it on Game Pass. I don't know. But I do think that the video game industry is kind of behind here. And I think it's partially from gamers. I think, we do like to collect games. We do like to purchase games. We do like to have ownership, because here's the flip side. And this is something that, everybody's been experiencing as well. So Nintendo is in the process of essentially like discontinuing accepting, I think, what is it, like adding money or accepting credit cards or something like that on their 3DS virtual consoles, their Wii virtual consoles. Like, their game services have been shut down. So that kind of goes back to, you can turn on your old hardware, but if you don't, like, with the PSP, for example, or the Vita might be a better example, because I did download a lot more games on the Vita than I did on the PSP. But you download, games on these old consoles, and then they shut down the store for them. Now you can restore your purchases, but what if your hardware doesn't work? Like, how do you, like, what do you do? You know what I mean? So the idea of ownership, I think, has been going away in media, in this internet age. But on the flip side too, with gaming, it's even weirder, because it's like, okay, now I can't experience this anymore. So how the heck do you do it? So I don't know. It makes sense that if you're playing current content, I do like the digital, the online. Like, I like Game Pass. I like Nintendo Switch Online. I like this stuff. But how do you maintain ownership? Like, in 10 years, if you want to play these games again, are you in a spot where everybody that bought the game physically is just like, woohoo, I got my collection's worth, $10,000 now. Cool. So I don't know. It's all very intriguing and interesting, and it's been fascinating, So I've been gaming for 30 plus years. Basically, as soon as I could hold a controller, I was playing Mario. You know what I mean? Like, so the NES was kind of, I had an Atari, but I think I had an Atari after. I think I got it at a garage sale, like, later on. But the NES is kind of what I say is my first, video game experiences, or console, you could say. So, having played this long, it's been absolutely fascinating seeing how developers and publishers and hardware manufacturers have tried to monetize this. So, sell the hardware because you want to sell the software. And at the end of the day, it's all about the software. Like, you definitely want to sell the hardware, but, you kind of see Microsoft, they're like, hey, we own the PC market. So they're at a unique advantage, because they're looking at it as, like, we just want to get as much revenue, whether it be PC or Xbox. Like, if you want to play across them, it doesn't matter, because we own both. And if we can get more people to experience this and pay for this, awesome. Like, we're opening up a massive revenue stream. But, for Nintendo, and Sony, well, yeah, Sony as well, like, they don't have an entire, like, PC market as well that they just own. So it's like, how do you continue growing and expanding? Is the existing video game model, and it's changed a lot since I've started gaming, but is it archaic? And I think so, to a certain degree. But when you eliminate the possibility of being able to play old games, because, it's not part of Xbox Game Pass, like, it's not part of Nintendo Switch Online. Like, I want to specifically play Final Fantasy 3. Cool. How do I go about doing that? I want to play it on my Switch. Well, you can't. You know what I mean? Or in my case, I want to play Persona 3 Portable today to refresh my memory and record a podcast. Well, guess what? You can't. So, I don't know. It's all very interesting. And it's been I think it's also kind of important. I'll wrap up this podcast with this because we've been talking for a while. Um, but we're also at a point now where we need to start, as a gaming community, preserving our history and our legacy and everything like that. And that's partially what I wanted to do with this podcast too, is like there's so many memories that and so many historical elements which are just forgotten because the video game industry is run as a business, but there's a lot of deep meaning and feeling behind some of these video game experiences. Like some of the most impactful, parts of my life, some of them are video game experiences, whether it be with friends or just, an experience with a game that kind of, changed how I think or changed how I perceive, things or the world. It's just, or seeing, what's even possible with this medium. So when you're creating an experience that you play and you just knock it out of the park and you take the player on a journey, I just don't think you can equate that to a movie. And, like for a while there, I was a movie buff. There's so many films that I absolutely love, watching. And, that's a whole other fun thing to talk about. Like, oh my gosh, have you seen this movie? But, the difference with our video game history and our video game legacies and, all of our stories. So your stories, my stories, it's an experience that we had, and it's an experience that we engaged in and led. So you play a game and you made the choices, like that was your experience that's unique to you. Somebody else might have played the game too, but their experience is unique to them. And I don't know if you quite get that with movies or TV shows. I think it's a little bit different because, like with a film, you're telling your story to the audience. With a video game, you're giving them the means to explore their story and interpret it, kind of how they see it. And you can't replicate that experience across people. So it's all very interesting. But, I look at all of these, there's fewer and fewer copies of video games out there, or, um, like there's just less and less because they haven't been manufactured in such a long time. So you look at, say Pokemon Blue. I looked at it. It was closed or complete in box, CIB, I think is what that means. And it was like $249. But how many Game Boy games like that still are in that good of shape, with the box perfect, the manual, like everything's good, the battery's like still working? Like, it might be like with my PSP. I pop open the back and I can't get it to, stay on. You know what I mean? Like it's just, there's limited copies of this, and people would have had to have like taken perfect care of it or sealed it at the right time or kept it away from their kids. Like I don't know. I think we're at the time now where we need to be preserving our video game history as well. And to do that, it's going to be expensive. You know what I mean? Because as people get older, and they have these massive collections that they preserved and they're tied to it, and they're like, I have all these experiences and I don't want to let them go, and they pass away. What happens then? It starts getting sold and getting out there. I don't know. I'm sure there's video game museums out there, but how do you fund it? Like, I can't imagine a video game museum, having solid funding and like, hey, we need, we need $25,000 because I gotta buy all these PS2 games. So I don't know. It's all kind of, interesting, and I think with kind of subscription based software, this is gonna sound crazy, but that's one way for Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft to kind of preserve their respective histories and give players the options to, Nintendo Switch Online does this really well, actually. It's almost like a little mini museum where you go in and you look at the game and there's some history about it and it tells you about the game and you can play it. And I think that's kind of how it has to be. Like you have to preserve your own history as well as you kind of go into the future too. So yeah, my luckily it didn't explode, but my expanded PSP battery, that is kind of what caused this podcast. So soon, Persona 3, SMT, and Persona 3, 4, and 5. And sharing some of my stories with those. Those are coming. But yeah, I just kind of want to talk about that a little bit because I went to a used game store. This happened, and it's like, I don't know. Everything's kind of wild out there right now and expensive. So if you want to play, some old GameCube games, which GameCube and PS2, I don't know why. I think it's because like I have pretty solid. Like I'm looking behind me now. I have pretty solid collections of those actually. But they're harder and more expensive to find, and I didn't have a lot of money during that time, so like it's like I wish I could have experienced these. But yeah, so that wraps up episode 6 of Gaming's Lost Memories. I'm your host, Big Reed, and stay tuned for some JRPG talk coming up with Persona 3, 4, and 5. And I look forward to talking to you guys next time. Thank you.